There is growing concern in this country and fear about deadly attacks against transgender Americans.
Today is Transgender Day of Remembrance, honoring those in the transgender community who have lost their lives to acts of hate.
As a community, as a movement, as people, we need your help to end this epidemic of violence.
There are a few ideas more commonly accepted in progressive circles than the notion that transgender people are killed at disproportionate rates, often referred to as an epidemic of anti-transgender murders. In some of the most extreme pockets of online discourse, you'll even find people warning about a trans going on all around us. This shocking narrative really tugs at the heartstrings of all good-minded people and is used frequently in the debate over transgender issues. But where does it come from? And is it actually true? We're going to break that down today in this video. But first, welcome back to my channel. I'm Brad Polumbo. I cover all the craziest things on the internet, in politics, and in the LGBT community from a center-right, moderate perspective. If you're new here, do consider subscribing and drop a like if you find this video interesting or insightful, and comment with your thoughts. Now let's dive into this narrative about the trans murder epidemic. I've seen this repeated so much in online spaces and in political rhetoric that I honestly was curious where it came from and how it started, and now we even have the Vice President of the United States and the President of the United States parroting this claim and this language, so it's really made it. It's been about as successful a messaging campaign as one can imagine. It's risen to the top levels of our politics, our media, and our government. Yet at the same time, it's basically never been questioned. It's just taken at face value and repeated by media outlets and by politicians who want to sound sympathetic, but nobody's seeming to ask for the receipts or the math that backs up this really extreme claim. I wanted to check it out for myself, so I went and tracked down where it came from. And it turns out it's partially derived from a report put out every year by the Human Rights Campaign, which you will know is one of the most left-wing LGBTQ rights activist organizations in America. They release an annual report called The Epidemic of Violence Against the Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Community in the United States. The most recent edition of this report was recently released, and it identifies 33 transgender Americans who were killed over the one-year time period between November 2022 and November 2023. It then directly connects this epidemic of anti-transgender violence to debates that good-hearted people might honestly disagree with, like sex segregation in school sports or restrictions on medical transitioning for minors. The epidemic of violence against transgender and gender nonconforming people is a national embarrassment, HRC President Kelly Robinson said in a letter accompanying the report. Each of these lives taken is a tragedy, the result of a society that demeans and devalues anyone who dares challenge the gender binary. Media institutions have been complicit in these attacks by presenting trans rights as part of a legitimate debate. The recent report had the exact impact that it was hoped to have by the activists that put it out. It was quickly parroted by mainstream media outlets like USA Today, The Hill, and many others, just like it has been in years past. And the mainstream media's uncritical embrace of this report every year and the alarming claims made in it might just explain why it's made it to such high levels of our politics and why it's taken for granted in many progressive circles and even many moderate circles that there is, in fact, an epidemic of violence against transgender people in the United States. There's just one problem. The entire premise, the very grain at the heart of this narrative, is a lie. It isn't true. Thankfully, transgender Americans are not, in fact, more likely to be murdered than any other American. In fact, the murder rate for the transgender community actually seems to be below the average, meaning they're less likely than your typical American to be killed in a given year. You don't have to take my word for it. I did the math, and I'm going to show you exactly how I reached this conclusion. So in 2022, we don't have full 2023 data yet, the US murder rate was 6.3 per 100,000 people, according to FBI statistics. So if the average is 6.3 per 100,000, we've then got to ask ourselves, what's the murder rate for transgender people? And how does it compare to that average? Well, the Human Rights Campaign identified 33 examples of transgender or gender nonconforming people being killed in the time period between November 2022 and November 2023. So a year. By the way, these include not just actual hate crimes, but any time they were killed, regardless of whether there was any animus proven to be involved in terms of it being anti-transgender in its motivation. Anyway, that's relative to an estimated 1.6 million transgender people in the United States, according to the UCLA's Williams Institute. If you do some basic math and compare the amount of murders said there to the population we know that exists, you get a murder rate for transgender Americans of about 2.06 per 100,000, which is actually way below the average. Now, the Human Rights Campaign does absolutely know that they don't document every possible death or killing of a transgender person, and that their list is not exhaustive. They just do their best to find every example from available reporting, police documents, etc. So let's be generous and fair, and honestly, and this was a real stretch, let's double the number. Let's say instead of 33, the real number is 66, as if they were only able to find half the cases, when in reality they probably found most of them, but let's be super generous and double the number. The murder rate for transgender people would still be significantly lower than the overall average for Americans. Of course, any loss of human life is always a tragedy, and that includes every one of the incidences that's documented in HRC's report. But where is this epidemic of anti-trans murder exactly? As a matter of statistical facts, statistical reality, it simply doesn't exist. Now, the other significant claim made by the Human Rights Campaign and many of its allies is that transgender people of color are particularly likely to be killed. They point to the fact that 30 out of the 33 people documented in their report are people of color. And they conclude that transgender people of color are at elevated risk of fatal violence. But is this claim true? Well, of the 1.6 million transgender people in the United States, roughly 45% are non-white, again according to the Williams Institute. That comes out to about 720,000 transgender people of color. If 30 were killed over a 1-year time period, that's about a 4.16 per 100,000 murder rate. Again, that's way below average. And this is all accepting HRC's data and the examples that they put in their report completely at face value. And all of their data assumes that each one of these is an example of someone wrongfully killed. But at least in some of the cases, it's a little more complicated than that. For example, HRC cites the killing of a transgender man named Banko Brown as one instance of the anti-trans murder epidemic. But even a pretty brief Google search reveals that Banko was killed by a security guard while shoplifting at a Walgreens after allegedly threatening to stab the guard and charging towards him, according to CNN. And notably, the security guard has not been charged with a crime specifically related to causing Brown's death. Brown's death is still, of course, sad, and I'm sure he'll be missed by loved ones and friends, and we all wish that situation could have been avoided. Yet there's a world of difference between the story of innocent transgender people being targeted in an anti-transgender murder epidemic that we hear from HRC and the actual facts of many of the cases that it cites. Now, the analysts and activists in the LGBT community, they're not fools. They're not stupid. They surely know that their data doesn't mean what they say it means, and doesn't mean what reporters and journalists always claim that it means. So why don't they correct them? Why don't they stop misleading the public about emotionally fraught and really important issues? The simplest answer, of course, is to maintain their own relevance and raise money. It's a lot easier to get donors to break out their checkbooks when you're warning them about an epidemic of anti-trans murders than if you were to go to them, hat in hand, and say, well, actually, transgender people are murdered at a significantly below average rate compared to the overall American. It doesn't have quite the same ring to it, or the urgency to inspire donations, even though it's the truth. The second explanation for why they would mislead the public, why they would tug on our heartstrings with a false narrative like this, is arguably more sinister. In its report, HRC very explicitly ties this so-called supposed epidemic of anti-trans murders to their partisan agenda. They draw a bright red line between supposedly anti-trans legislation like bills restricting drag performances to adult attendees and legislation segregating high school sports by sex. Such bills ingrain discrimination and hate into law, perpetuate stigma and marginalization of transgender people, and harm the health and well-being of transgender youth, HRC concludes. Hear that, folks? Transgender people are being murdered in mass across the country, and if you disagree on things like sex-segregated sports or whether minors can consent to sterilizing medical transitions, you are a bigot and you are getting people killed. You see how this is a tactic? Do you see how they're weaponizing the tragic and premature death of transgender Americans to try to shut down and stifle debate? I mean, they literally attack the media for treating trans issues as if there's any legitimate debate. Like, there is, though, on some of this stuff. And are we really supposed to believe that somebody like Benko Brown wouldn't have died if more male transgender students were allowed to compete in girls' high school sports? Huh? Look, activists, they really don't even attempt to defend any of this on a logical basis. No, they're simply hoping that emotionally charged and extreme rhetoric and stories about an epidemic of murders against trans people will scare and cow good-hearted Americans into submission. And unfortunately, all signs suggest right now that this dishonest approach is working a treat. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I'm Brad Polumbo. Do drop a like if you found this interesting or informative, and comment with your thoughts below. I will see you all in my next video. Do consider subscribing, and if you're not sick of me yet, you can check out more of my content here or here to keep watching my videos. But regardless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.